The black bear stood up on its hind legs, and I made the single worst decision of my entire life. I dropped to the forest floor, curled into a ball, covered the back of my neck with my hands, and went completely limp because somewhere in the back of my mind I remembered hearing, "Play dead for bears." Nobody mentioned that this advice only works for grizzlies defending territory, and that black bears, the curious, food-motivated, generally less murderous cousins of the bear family, respond to a motionless human the way a cat responds to a feather on a string. He nosed me, he pawed me, he treated me like a particularly large, unresponsive sandwich, and I lay there frozen, congratulating myself on my survival instincts right up until the moment they stopped working. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up here. Oh, hey there. I should clarify, I didn't die in that exact moment. That came later, and honestly, it's a longer story involving a second bear, a steep ravine, and a truly humiliating amount of bad luck. But that first encounter, that's the moment that rewired my brain, because in the half second before everything went wrong, I had genuinely believed that going still, just shutting my whole body down and pretending the lights were off, was going to save me. And somewhere out there, animals do this exact maneuver every single day, and it works spectacularly, constantly. It's one of the oldest tricks in the entire animal kingdom, and I picked the one circumstance where it absolutely does not apply. So now I'm dead, I've got nothing but time, and I have spent what feels like several geological epochs parked in the dirt, the canopy, the riverbanks, and the tide pools of this planet, watching creature after creature collapse, twitch, drool from places blood shouldn't come from, and flop over like the world's worst actor, all to convince something bigger and hungrier that there's nothing here worth eating. This is the story of playing dead properly, scientifically, with all the parts the documentaries skip because they're too busy doing dramatic slow-motion shots of lions. Let's get into it. Here's something that should bother you more than it probably does. Playing dead is not a costume. It's not an act animals choose to put on, like a kid pretending to nap to avoid bedtime. For the vast majority of species that do it, this is an involuntary neurological event. Their nervous system makes the call, not them. Scientists call it thanatosis, or tonic immobility, depending on which corner of the research world you're standing in, and it shows up in fish, reptiles, birds, mammals, insects, and even some crustaceans. That's an enormous, completely unrelated guest list of species that all independently stumbled on to the exact same trick. Freeze your body, shut down your responses, and bet your entire life on a predator's brain getting bored or grossed out. That's the part people miss. This isn't one strategy. It's dozens of strategies that evolution invented over and over again in completely different bodies, because the math behind it is just that good. Fast fact 1. A largemouth bass and a domestic chicken have almost nothing in common evolutionarily. Different class, different habitat, different number of legs, frankly, different number of fins. And yet, both species can be flipped onto their backs and induced into the exact same paralytic freeze response. Evolution found the same loophole twice in two animals separated by hundreds of millions of years of separate development. That's not a coincidence. That's a really good idea getting discovered independently, the same way humans and termites both figured out air conditioning. Which brings us to something even stranger. Everybody knows the phrase playing a possum. Almost nobody knows what it actually involves, because what it actually involves is disgusting, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. When a Virginia opossum goes into thanatosis, it isn't just lying there looking peaceful. Its lips pull back into a stiff grimace. It drools, sometimes excessively, its body temperature drops, its heart rate slows, and, this is the part that wildlife shows somehow never linger on, it often empties its anal glands, releasing a fluid that smells distinctly like rot and decay. The whole performance can last anywhere from a few minutes to 4 hours, and the opossum has no say in any of it. It's not deciding to fake death. Its brain has been hijacked by a stress response so extreme that the animal essentially short-circuits into catatonia. Here's the part that still gets me. You can pick the animal up, poke it, roll it over. It won't react. Its eyes might even stay open, glassy and unfocused, while its whole nervous system runs on a kind of emergency idle. Predators that rely on movement to trigger a killing response, and a surprising number of them do, will frequently lose interest entirely. Some carnivores are also less inclined to eat something that smells like it's already been dead for 2 days, because eating actual carrion comes with a real risk of disease and parasites. The opossum isn't fooling the predator's eyes so much as it's fooling its entire risk assessment system. Myth 1. Playing possum is a conscious decision. True or false? False. Completely false. This is an involuntary catatonic stress response controlled by the brainstem, not a strategic choice the animal weighs and executes. The opossum isn't thinking, "Ah, yes, time to deploy my secret weapon." Its body is doing this to it, the same way your body might lock up during a moment of pure terror. The opossum doesn't choose stillness. Stillness chooses the opossum. But before we get into the next one, let's talk about a species that takes a much more theatrical approach to the same basic idea.
If the opossum is doing community theater, the hognose snake is doing a one-creature Broadway production, complete with fake blood. When a hognose snake feels cornered, it has options. First, it tries to look terrifying, flattening its neck into a hood, hissing, striking with its mouth closed like a furious cobra impersonation. If that bluff doesn't land, it pivots completely. It rolls onto its back, opens its mouth, lets its tongue loll out, and in many cases actually ruptures small blood vessels to let blood seep from its mouth. It goes fully limp. It may even release a foul-smelling musk for good measure. Here's the detail that turns this from a neat trick into a genuinely strange piece of animal behavior. If you find a hognose snake mid-performance and flip it right side up, it will, almost immediately, flip itself back over onto its back. Because in its current programming, dead snakes lie belly up. A right side up snake looks suspicious. A belly up snake looks convincingly deceased. The snake is so committed to looking correctly dead that it will actively undo your help. This is where the science gets genuinely interesting and genuinely uncertain, so let's be precise about what's known versus what's suspected. Researchers studying hognose snakes have found evidence that the intensity and duration of the death feigning response can vary depending on the type of threat and how the animal was approached, suggesting this isn't a single fixed reflex, but something with at least some flexibility built in. That doesn't mean the snake is making a calculated decision the way you'd plan a chess move. It likely means different threat cues are wired to different intensities of the same instinctual program. Known, the behavior exists and is triggered by perceived predation threat. Likely, the intensity is somewhat threat-specific. Hypothesized and still debated, how much of this counts as decision-making versus pure reflex. Nobody's claiming the snake is strategizing, but it's also not as robotic as people assume. Speaking of terrible decisions, let's talk about a fish that turned this entire concept upside down. Literally. Most animals play dead to avoid getting eaten. The livingstons cichlid, a freshwater fish native to Lake Malawi, said no thank you to that entire premise and decided to play dead in order to eat something else. This predator drifts sideways near the lake bottom, body limp, coloring modeled to resemble a decaying carcass. It looks convincingly like a fish that has recently died. Scavenger fish, the lake's cleanup crew, species that specialize in eating dead and dying animals, approach to investigate the free meal. And the moment one gets close enough, the corpse springs back to life and eats it. This is called aggressive mimicry, and it completely flips the entire framework we've been building. Thanatosis isn't always a defense. Sometimes it's bait. Evolution looked at pretend to be dead and realized it works just as well as an offensive weapon as it does as a defensive one, which honestly should not surprise anyone who's ever met a con artist. Fast fact 2. This exact predatory behavior has a name straight out of a heist movie, tonic immobility used as a lure. Researchers have documented it specifically in Nimbochromis livingstoni, and it remains one of the only confirmed cases of a vertebrate using death feigning as an active hunting strategy rather than a survival one. And that's only half the story, because not every animal that fakes death is risking its life or hunting for one. Some are just managing a budget. Flower beetles, small, unglamorous, the kind of insect you'd never look at twice, have become one of the most studied animals in death feigning research because their behavior reveals something almost nobody expects. How long an animal plays dead is directly tied to its energy reserves. This is less master strategist and more tiny caffeinated accountant managing a very tight energy budget. Researchers, notably Takahisa Miyatake and colleagues studying tribolium beetles, found that individuals with more body fat and energy reserves tended to feign death for longer durations, while beetles running on emptier tanks cut the performance short and got moving again sooner. Staying frozen is a gamble. It costs you foraging time and mating opportunities, and the beetle's body appears to be running a constant cost-benefit calculation about how long it can afford to stay dead before resuming its actual life. Selective breeding experiments pushed this further. Scientists bred beetle lines specifically for longer or shorter death-feigning durations across generations, and within a relatively short number of generations, they had populations with measurably different default behaviors. This tells us something important. The duration of death feigning isn't fixed. It's a heritable trait that natural selection can tune up or tune down depending on what the local predators reward. Now, here's where nature gets weird in a completely different direction. Sharks have a reflex called tonic immobility, and it might be the single most consequential discovery in this entire script because two completely different groups figured out how to weaponize it: orcas and marine biologists. Flip most sharks upside down, and within seconds, their bodies go rigid and calm. Breathing slows, muscle activity drops. It's thought to be linked to overstimulation of the shark's electroreceptors, the same organs they use to detect the tiny electrical fields produced by prey, though researchers are still working out the exact mechanism, so consider this a likely explanation rather than a fully settled one.
Marine biologists use this for good. Flipping a shark induces a calm, motionless state that allows researchers to safely tag, measure, and release the animal with far less stress and far less risk of injury to both shark and scientist, compared to handling a fully alert, thrashing predator. Orcas use it for the exact opposite reason. Pods of orcas, particularly off the coast of South Africa, have been documented using a hunting technique where they ram or flip great white sharks onto their backs, inducing tonic immobility and effectively pinning the shark in a helpless, paralyzed state. Once immobilized, the orca can feed, often targeting the shark's nutrient-rich liver, while the shark, fully alive, fully conscious by most evidence, and completely unable to fight back, has no way to resist. Sit with that for a second. The exact biological glitch that keeps a shark calm and safe in a scientist's hands is the same glitch a smarter predator figured out how to use as an execution method. Same trapdoor, completely different outcome depending entirely on who finds it first. Chickens somehow ended up at the center of decades of tonic immobility research, not because anyone particularly cared about chicken drama, but because their freeze response turned out to be an incredibly precise way to measure fear. Flip a chicken on its back, restrain it briefly, and let go. In a stressed or highly fearful bird, it'll remain motionless for a noticeably longer stretch of time than a calmer one. Poultry scientists have used the duration of this immobility as a standardized welfare indicator for decades, longer freeze times generally correlating with higher background fear levels in the bird's environment. It's essentially a fear thermometer with feathers, and it's been used to compare stress levels across different housing conditions, handling methods, and farming practices. This is a strange thing to know about chickens. It's also a genuinely useful research tool that most people who eat eggs for breakfast have never once thought about. Myth-busting bears. And now, because I promised you my own humiliating backstory had a point, let's clear this up properly. Myth. Playing dead works on all bears. True or false? Mostly false, and dangerously so. Wildlife agencies generally recommend playing dead specifically for grizzly and brown bear encounters, where the bear is acting defensively, protecting cubs or a food source, because the goal is to convince the bear you're not a threat, at which point it often disengages once it no longer perceives danger. For black bears, the advice flips almost entirely. Black bear attacks are far more often predatory in nature, meaning the bear sees you as a potential meal rather than a threat to neutralize. Playing dead in that scenario does not communicate, "I am not dangerous." It communicates, "I am conveniently motionless," which is the opposite message you want to send. Wildlife agencies instead recommend fighting back, making noise, and using anything available as a weapon. I did not know this distinction. The bear in question was a black bear. You can see where this is going. This is genuinely one of the only documented cases where a species, humans, actively copied an animal survival strategy, applied it with zero understanding of the underlying mechanism, and occasionally got it catastrophically backwards. Evolution spent millions of years fine-tuning Thanatosis into a precise tool. We looked at it, said, looks easy, and started winging it. Every rule in nature comes with a footnote, and Thanatosis has several. Some predators simply aren't fooled or don't care. Certain scavenger birds and opportunistic carnivores will happily eat something that's technically still alive but presenting as dead, particularly if hunger outweighs caution, which, evolutionarily speaking, it often does. There's also a documented risk for opossums specifically. The catatonic stress state is metabolically expensive and physiologically taxing, and in rare cases, particularly in already weakened or stressed individuals, the response can contribute to the animal's death rather than preventing it. The strategy that's supposed to save your life can, under the wrong conditions, become part of what kills you. Group-living animals complicate the picture too. Some ant species exhibit a form of death feigning at the colony level, where individual workers freeze when disturbed, and this appears to function partly as camouflage against ground vibration-sensing predators, and partly as a kind of decoy, a still, uninteresting ant being a lower priority target than a panicking, scattering one. But not every ant in a threatened colony freezes. The response varies, and researchers are still mapping out exactly which conditions trigger it versus flight. So, no, this isn't a universal cheat code. It's a strategy with real costs, real exceptions, and real failure states, same as literally everything else evolution has ever produced. You're walking a quiet trail at dusk. Something small darts in front of you, then suddenly collapses, completely limp, one wing splayed at an unnatural angle. Every instinct in your body says injured bird, easy to help. You crouch down towards it. Here's what's actually happening. In a lot of ground-nesting species, this is a broken wing display, a deliberate, far more conscious-seeming performance than true Thanatosis, used by adult birds to lure predators away from a nearby nest. The bird isn't frozen in catatonic shock, it's actively performing injury, dragging itself just out of reach, leading you, the predator, as far as it's concerned, further and further away from its eggs. The second you're far enough away, it miraculously recovers and flies off completely fine. You didn't rescue anything. You got worked by a bird with a nest to protect, and absolutely no shame about lying to your face. Fast fact 3. Killdeer, a common ground-nesting shorebird, are essentially the gold standard for this broken wing routine, and the display gets noticeably more elaborate and prolonged the closer a potential predator gets to the actual nest, meaning the bird appears to be calibrating the performance based on real-time threat proximity, not just running a single fixed script.
Fast fact 4. Some species of frogs exhibit a death feigning response so convincing that researchers have documented heart rate dropping substantially during the freeze state, blurring the line between performance and genuine physiological shutdown. Which brings us to the part of this script where I stop being charming and get genuinely respectful for a second, because the numbers here deserve it. Across studies on death-feigning prey and their predators, spiders, beetles, mantids, various small vertebrates, a consistent pattern shows up again and again. Animals that feign death are, broadly, significantly less likely to be killed during a predation attempt compared to those that flee or fight. In some specific predator-prey pairings studied closely, like certain beetle species against jumping spiders, feigning individuals have shown survival rates roughly double that of their non-feigning counterparts in controlled trials. Imagine flipping a coin for your life, except one strategy quietly changes the odds so the coin lands in your favor twice as often. That's not a fun fact. That's the entire reason this behavior exists in dozens of unrelated species across hundreds of millions of years. It's not quirky, it's just really, really good math. I want to close out the science section with something that still genuinely surprises me, even after an unreasonable amount of time spent loitering in forests with nothing else to do.
Some social insects appear to coordinate around death feigning in ways that look almost cooperative. In certain ant colonies, when a threat is detected, the freeze response in individual workers can effectively reduce overall movement and noise, making the whole nest less detectable. No single ant is deciding to protect the group, but the aggregate effect of thousands of individuals running the same instinctual subroutine produces something that looks, from the outside, suspiciously like a strategy. Nobody's in charge, nobody planned it, it just works, the same way traffic somehow self-organizes without anyone actually being in control of it.